The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood lemon polish and the quiet anticipation of judgment. Clara Whitmore stepped through the tall oak doors without a word, her sandals whispering against the marble floor. The sound echoed in the cavernous space, punctuated only by a few rustling papers and the tap-tap of expensive heels from the other side of the room. Heads turned just slightly as she walked in. Not in admiration. In confusion. She looked out of place. Her dress was soft blue linen, wrinkled at the edges. No jewelry. No makeup. Her hair pulled back in a simple, low twist. She carried a leather-bound notebook under one arm, and her hands trembled just enough to notice if you were looking for it. She took her seat quietly next to her attorney, Melinda Cruz, who looked young, serious, and a touch nervous. Melinda offered a tight smile, then bent over her files. Across the aisle, Darren Whitmore adjusted the cuff of his crisp white shirt and gave a quiet sigh. His silver cufflinks gleamed like trophies. Beside him sat Aubrey Lowell, pristine in a cream suit with gold buttons, her hair styled like she'd stepped off a magazine cover. She glanced at Clara, and then leaned in, whispering something that made Darren smirk. It wasn't the first time Clara had seen that smirk. Family Court, Charleston County Docket, 332B, the bailiff called. Whitmore versus Whitmore. Final hearing on divorce proceedings. Clara looked straight ahead, locking her eyes on the empty judge's bench. Melinda leaned toward her. "You sure about this?" she whispered. Clara nodded once her voice steady but quiet. "Let them talk." Judge Margaret Ellis entered moments later, her presence commanding but calm. She scanned the courtroom before sitting her glasses sliding down her nose as she reviewed the folder in front of her. "Let's proceed," she said simply. Preston Blake Darren's lawyer stood. He was polished theatrical in the way some Southern attorneys were charming in private, brutal in court. His voice was warm, but Clara knew that warmth could cut. "Your Honor," he began, "we're here today not only to finalize a divorce, but to clarify what's fair and appropriate in terms of division of assets. My client, Mr. Whitmore, built a successful wealth management firm from the ground up. He has offered a generous one-time settlement of $5,000. Ms. Whitmore, Clara has requested ongoing support, despite having made respectfully little measurable contribution to the business." He turned, gesturing toward Clara, as if introducing a ghost. During the 5 years of marriage, she held modest part-time work, most recently, shelving books at the public library. A commendable civic job, no doubt. But hardly one that justifies a claim on Mr. Whitmore's current earnings. "This isn't about cruelty, Your Honor. It's about clarity. Ms. Whitmore has no dependents, no ongoing medical needs, and no ties to the business. My client proposes a respectful but firm conclusion to this matter." He nodded toward Judge Ellis and sat down. Melinda didn't move. She stared at her notes for a beat too long. Clara could feel her heartbeat in her ears, but her expression didn't change. Across the room, Darren folded his hands and leaned back as if this were all a routine financial review, not the formal ending of a marriage. He avoided looking at Clara, but Aubrey looked straight at her, her expression somewhere between polite pity and confident dismissal. Judge Ellis turned. "Ms. Cruz, response." Melinda stood slowly, cleared her throat, and walked to the center of the room. "My client supported Mr. Whitmore emotionally and financially in the early years. She helped him launch his firm when it was little more than a business license and a laptop on a folding table." She, Objection, Preston said, standing again. "Your Honor, this is anecdotal. We're not here to relitigate emotional labor." Judge Ellis held up a hand. "Overruled. Continue, Ms. Cruz." Melinda nodded. "Thank you. My client worked 2 jobs in those first years. She covered rent, groceries, even business software subscriptions." She typed proposals at night sometimes until dawn. She hosted meetings in their rented apartment, cooked meals for prospective investors, and maintained the home while Mr. Whitmore focused full-time on building his brand. She paused. My client is not asking for charity. She's asking for recognition. Darren scoffed, quiet but audible. It was the sound that finally cracked something open. Clara blinked once, then leaned toward Melinda and whispered a few words. Melinda froze. Are you sure? Clara nodded, still not looking at Darren. I'm done being quiet. Melinda turned back toward the bench. Your Honor, my client would like to formally withdraw her claim for spousal support. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Preston raised an eyebrow, clearly trying to hide his satisfaction. Well, that's unexpected. Are we moving toward a full settlement, then? Melinda turned to him. Her voice was firmer now. No. We're moving toward something else. She walked to her table and pulled out a new folder. We are filing a motion to retrieve personal property left behind in the marital home. Assets that were not disclosed in the petitioner's original inventory. Judge Ellis looked up sharply. And what assets are these? Melinda opened the folder and laid out a typed list on the evidence table. A private art collection, a series of inherited investment certificates, and personal items valued conservatively at over $20 million. The courtroom went silent. Even Preston didn't speak. Aubrey turned to Darren, her expression cracking. What is she talking about? She whispered. Clara didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. Judge Ellis leaned forward, hands clasped. Ms. Cruz, are you prepared to substantiate this claim? Melinda nodded. We are, Your Honor. Clara looked up finally and met Darren's eyes. His face had drained of color. He searched her expression as if trying to reread 5 years of shared life in reverse. For the first time since the hearing began, Clara saw something new in his eyes. Not contempt, not pity, confusion, followed by fear. She lowered her gaze and smoothed her skirt with one hand, as if brushing away the last pieces of the life they once built. Then she whispered more to herself than anyone else. Let's talk about what's actually mine. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way, either. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of the courthouse, casting long shadows across the floor. Clara sat motionless at the defense table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She could still feel the way Darren's gaze had locked on her, sharp, confused searching, as if trying to piece together a puzzle he hadn't known existed. He was good at math, terrible at people. Melinda leaned in slightly, her voice hushed. That was dramatic. We'll need documentation before the next hearing. If you're sure, I'm sure, Clara said, gently interrupting. It's time. The gavel hit once. Judge Ellis announced a recess. The courtroom stirred with low murmurs and the subtle shift of chairs. As they gathered their things, Clara noticed Aubrey standing just beyond the wooden rail, whispering sharply into Darren's ear. Her expression had changed. Less polished, more alert. What did she mean? 20 million, Darren, you told me she had nothing. I don't know what she's pulling, he muttered, trying to sound composed, but Clara could hear the slight crack in his voice. She was a librarian. Aubrey. She wore clearance shoes and clipped coupons. Clara rose slowly, her file pressed against her chest. She passed the couple without looking their way, but she felt Darren's eyes follow her out of the courtroom like a question that wouldn't leave. Outside, the air was heavy with Charleston's late summer humidity. Clara stepped down the courthouse steps and paused at the bottom, inhaling the thick scent of magnolia trees and distant sea breeze. It had always calmed her, the salt in the air, the echo of carriage wheels 2 blocks over. Familiar, grounding. Melinda caught up beside her. I've never seen a courtroom freeze like that. Clara gave a soft, almost tired smile. They thought they knew me. That's the thing about being quiet. People mistake it for being small. Melinda tilted her head, watching her. I have to ask. Why now? Clara took a slow breath. Her voice was calm but heavy. Because for 5 years I believed loving someone meant helping them build their dream, even when it meant tearing pieces out of myself. And when it was over, he wanted me to disappear, as if none of it had happened, as if I was just a temporary chair he sat in until the real furniture arrived. Melinda didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence felt respectful. They parted at the sidewalk. Clara turned left, walking the few blocks toward the Market Street trolley stop. She didn't own a car anymore. Gave it up last year when she picked up more shifts at the library and moved into a smaller place. She hadn't minded. The walks were where she thought best. Charleston had a rhythm and old soul tucked into every brick road. As she approached the corner, a voice called out from a shaded bench near the entrance of a small bookshop. Well, if it isn't Miss Whitmore. Clara stopped. The voice was unmistakable. Gentle weathered, touched with playful wisdom. June Holloway smiled over her sunglasses, sipping sweet tea from a mason jar with a paper straw. Heard from Lucy down at the clerk's office you stirred up quite the scene this morning. Clara gave a half laugh, folding her arms. Word travels fast. In this town, honey word travels before the facts do. Clara sat beside her, the wooden bench, warm from the sun. June had been her neighbor years ago, when she and Darren lived in the upstairs apartment of an old converted carriage house. She used to bring over warm peach cobbler and unsolicited life advice in equal measure. June set the tea down beside her purse. So, you gonna tell me what that man did? Clara paused, glancing at the window of the bookstore across the street. A display of poetry collections sat behind the glass. She remembered buying a book of Mary Oliver's poems there. It had felt like a secret at the time, a reminder of herself. He didn't hit me. He didn't cheat on me. He didn't even raise his voice, Clara said softly. He just stopped seeing me, like I'd faded out of the photo. June made a low sound in her throat. Sometimes that's worse. That kind of silence, she shook her head, makes a woman feel like wallpaper. Clara nodded. He used to say I was his piece. Then he decided peace wasn't enough. He wanted power, prestige. He got them. And now he's got a woman who matches the cufflinks. June chuckled under her breath. Let me guess. Blonde, straight spine probably hasn't eaten a biscuit since high school. Clara smiled in spite of herself. Her name's Aubrey. She's perfect. On the outside. June leaned back. Ain't nobody perfect. And if you have to wear it that hard, chances are it don't fit. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the breeze lifting the hem of Clara's dress. Across the street, a father walked hand in hand with his daughter, a tiny paperback dangling from her other hand. You know, June said, you always had this quiet fire in you. I remember thinking back then, she's gonna break her heart trying to carry that man's world. Clara looked down. Her voice caught a little. I just didn't think he'd erase me so easily, like I was nothing. You were never nothing, June said. You just gave everything to someone who didn't know how to hold it. Clara blinked hard. The words hit deeper than expected. You still got your mother's locket? June asked gently. Clara hesitated. No. I sold it, a few years ago, when Darren needed capital to launch Whitmore Group. June didn't gasp or scold her. She just exhaled slowly, like someone witnessing a quiet kind of grief. Well, she said, at last, I hope that boy understands what he really lost. Clara didn't answer. She stood smoothing the back of her dress. Thanks for the tea, she said with a warm nod. You didn't drink any. Clara smiled faintly. Didn't have to. Just needed the seat. As she walked away, she felt the sun press down on her back like a hand guiding her forward. Her past was not a burden, it was a ledger. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready to balance it. That night, Clara pulled a worn banker's box from the back of her hall closet. Inside were a few documents, a velvet pouch, and a small key. She hadn't touched it in years. But the safe deposit box still existed, under her legal maiden name. Jennings. She ran her fingers over the name on the envelope. The paper had yellowed slightly, but the ink hadn't faded. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't used since her 20s. It rang twice. Then a man's voice answered, measured, familiar, and steady. "This is Russell Hargrove." Clara's voice didn't shake. "It's Clara. I'm ready." The walls of the bank's private vault room were lined with brushed metal doors, cool and impersonal. The air smelled faintly of copper and paper, and time, like everything inside, had been sealed away from the world. Clara sat alone at a table under soft, recessed lighting, a thin beige envelope in front of her untouched. She hadn't seen Russell in nearly 10 years. He'd aged gracefully, of course, always immaculately dressed, always composed. But when he walked into the room 10 minutes earlier and greeted her with a simple "Miss Jennings," it stirred something she hadn't expected. Not fear. Not regret. Recognition. The kind that comes when someone sees the version of you you'd hidden so well you'd nearly forgotten it existed. She finally peeled back the flap of the envelope, pulling out the safety deposit inventory list and the key. Her fingers hesitated over the small silver locket inside, tucked between documents and one folded newspaper clipping. The locket. Her mother's. She had lied to June. It hadn't been sold, not really. It had been stored away the day Darren told her he'd handle the finances from now on, the day he laughed at the dinner table when she suggested investing in local literacy programs. The day she felt herself shift from partner to shadow. She closed the box slowly, breathing through her nose to steady the tremor in her chest. When she exited the vault room, Russell was waiting in the hallway, standing like an oak in his tailored charcoal suit. His hands were clasped in front of him. Not tense, just waiting. "Still feels strange in there," she said quietly. "Like everything has weight, even the air." Russell gave a single thoughtful nod. "We store the past in metal boxes and wonder why it never truly leaves us." She smiled faintly. "You haven't changed." "You have," he said. "Not unkindly, but not in the way they think." She met his gaze. "I need to make this right." "You are. You just have to decide who needs to know and when." Clara looked down at the envelope in her hands. "The court date's next week. I'll need certified appraisals, chain of custody, documentation. You'll have it. Discreetly." They walked side by side down the corridor toward the bank lobby, quiet except for the soft echo of their shoes against the polished floor. "I appreciate you coming," Clara said as they reached the glass doors. Russell opened one for her, pausing before stepping out. "Your father asked about you last week." She froze. Russell watched her face. "I told him the truth, that you were still finding your voice." Clara looked away, her throat tight. "He never approved of my choices. He doesn't approve of most people's," Russell said. "But he respects integrity. You've never been short on that." She nodded, once the air thick between them. "Tell him I'm not coming back. You already did." As she stepped out into the sunlight, her heart buzzed with a quiet electricity. Not adrenaline. Something deeper. Like the truth had finally taken its first breath after years underwater. By the time she arrived back at her apartment, a small but tidy walk-up off Rutledge Avenue, the afternoon heat was beginning to lift. She climbed the stairs slowly, her thoughts chasing themselves. Inside the apartment was silent, filled with books and soft yellow light. Her desk sat by the window, still scattered with sticky notes and overdue interlibrary loan slips. She'd put her entire world into quiet service. The thing about being dependable was that people started treating it like silence. She was done being quiet. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the old rooftops of Charleston, Clara received a message from Melinda. Simple, direct. Tomorrow. 9 a.m., office. Bring everything. She typed back one word, ready. But she didn't sleep. Instead, she pulled out a box of old journals from beneath her bed records she'd kept over the years. Budget ledgers, printouts of Darren's early proposals, handwritten schedules she used to map his investor meetings. She had backed him like a second spine. Quietly, invisibly. And then there was the notebook, the one she hadn't touched since the night she decided to let him go. Inside were bits of her thoughts, hopes, doodles of floor plans for the literacy center she once dreamed of opening. At the center of the book was a letter she had started never sent, addressed to herself. She read the first line aloud softly. If you ever forget what you're worth, remember who you were before he told you otherwise. The words hit like a quiet bell. And suddenly she remembered something else, a voice from a different time. Hey, you're Clara Jennings, right? She blinked. That voice. She turned her head. Not in memory. In real time. Through her open window from the street below stood a young man in a light button-down shirt and jeans, holding a manila folder. He looked up and gave an apologetic smile. Sorry to startle you. I'm Devin Blake. I work for Preston Blake, my dad. Her heart caught. She opened the window fully. You're the paralegal. He nodded. Yes, ma'am. I helped file Darren's financial disclosures. Just wanted to say I'm not here on his behalf, or my father's. Clara narrowed her eyes slightly. Then why are you here? Devin hesitated, then held up the folder. Because something in the records didn't sit right. And I think you should see it. He looked uncertain but sincere. Clara stared at him for a long moment before responding. Come up. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. Clara stood by the door, the soft creak of the hallway floor announcing Devin's steps before he appeared. She opened the door slowly, unsure of what to expect, but every instinct told her this wasn't a game. Devin offered a polite smile, the folder still tucked under his arm. He looked young, but not inexperienced young. More like he hadn't yet been hardened by the courtroom's cold machinery. His eyes held a calm clarity, as if he'd grown up watching people pretend to be honest and knew how to recognize the difference. Thanks for letting me come up, he said. I know this is strange. Clara stepped back. You said you had something I needed to see? Devin entered the room, his gaze drifting briefly to the books lining her shelves, the neat piles of library papers, the cup of pens by the window. I won't stay long. Just this felt important. He laid the folder on her kitchen table, careful like it held something fragile. Clara pulled out a chair and sat. You work for your father. Technically, yes, Devin said, sitting across from her. But I don't always agree with how he runs things. She opened the folder. Inside were 3 documents, a property transfer form, an internal memo from a firm called East Harbor Realty, and a notarized letter signed by Darren. She scanned quickly. The first line made her stomach tighten. As per verbal agreement, the transfer of remaining assets from marital property to Whitmore Holdings shall be executed immediately upon finalization of proceedings. Clara looked up. He's trying to sell the house. Devon nodded. Not just sell it. Liquidate what's left fast. The art, the safe, the custom fixtures. He's listing it as an unencumbered asset. Clara blinked, her voice suddenly hollow. He's erasing me. It's already in motion, Devon added gently. But it hasn't gone through. The firm hasn't signed the final contract yet. Legally, the property's still joint until the divorce is finalized. She swallowed hard. So he thought once he got the judge to dismiss my claim, he could sweep the rest under the rug. Sell everything. Keep what he wanted, donate the rest, and I'd walk away with nothing. Devon was quiet. I can't speak to his intentions, but the documents speak loud enough. Clara stood, her hands pressing into the edge of the table. Her breath came slow but sharp. You brought this, she said after a moment. Why? Devon leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. Because I saw the look on his face when you said you were withdrawing your support claim. It wasn't confusion. It was panic. And I thought, what could she possibly know that would scare him? He paused, measuring her expression. Then I remembered your name. Jennings. Clara's jaw tensed. She hated how heavy that name still felt when it wasn't wrapped in love. Devon continued, careful not to press. I didn't say anything to anyone, not even my dad. But I looked through past filings. I saw that your maiden name was redacted in the original petition. I've been around enough old Southern firms to know Jennings isn't just a name. It's a legacy. Clara exhaled slowly. He never asked who I was before him. Not really. Darren thought I was safe. Quiet, easy to leave. Devon gave her a look that wasn't pity. It was something closer to quiet respect. You're not easy to leave, he said softly. You're just not loud about what you carry. The words hit her harder than she expected. She sat down again, suddenly tired. The kind of tired that comes after holding something for too long. Do you know what it's like, she said quietly, to build a dream with someone only to realize you were never part of it? Devon didn't flinch. Yeah, I do. They sat in silence for a moment, the room thick with things unsaid. Finally, Clara asked, Why are you helping me? Devon shrugged lightly. Because I believe in people who've been underestimated, and because sometimes the right thing to do isn't the same as the legal thing. She studied him. There was no agenda in his face, no edge, just a steadiness that felt strangely comforting. Do you want tea? She asked, almost surprised by her own voice. Devon blinked, then smiled. Yeah, I'd like that. They moved to the small kitchenette. Clara filled the kettle while Devon leaned against the counter, looking out the window. This place suits you, he said, glancing around. It's quiet, I figured. She poured hot water into 2 chipped ceramic mugs, handing him one. They stood in the warm hush of her apartment, sipping, not speaking. And then quietly, Devon said, You're going to win. You know that, right? Clara looked over, her voice soft but steady. I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to stop disappearing. He nodded. Well, you're doing that too. They sat again, the folder still open on the table between them. Clara looked at it, at the proof of Darren's calculated betrayal. But what stuck with her more than the words of the page was the one question she hadn't yet asked out loud. What if Darren hadn't left? What if he had never been unfaithful but had still made her invisible? What do you call that kind of heartbreak? Not explosive. Not loud, just silent. The kind of hurt that seeps in quietly and convinces you to question your own value. Devon stood after a while, sensing the shift. He tucked the rest of the documents back into the folder and handed them to her. You'll need these tomorrow. Don't wait too long. Clara nodded, taking them from him carefully. He paused at the door. If you need anything, my number's on the back. I'll help however I can. She opened the door for him, her fingers still wrapped around the folder. "Thank you," she said, "for choosing to see me." Devon gave a slight nod. Some people are hard to miss, even when they try to be. And then he was gone. Clara stood alone in the doorway for a long time after the weight of the folder in her hands, heavier than it should have been. But something in her was lighter. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for someone else to hand her worth back. She was ready to reclaim it. Clara hadn't been back to the Jennings estate in over 8 years. The iron gates still creaked the same way they did the last time she left. Quiet, reluctant. The gravel crunched beneath the tires of the car as she pulled onto the long drive, the trees overhead forming a leafy tunnel that filtered the sunlight into gold-tinted shadows. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel. The closer she got to the house, the louder her heartbeat became, steady and low, like the echo of an old memory. The house appeared slowly from behind a row of magnolias, 3 stories tall, pale brick, with green shutters-wide porches wrapped in ivy. It wasn't grand in the way outsiders imagined. It was older than that, heavier. It wore its history like a silk scarf, quiet, deliberate, impossible to ignore. She parked beside the garden wall and turned off the engine. The silence was complete. The front door opened before she even reached the steps. "Miss Clara." A voice she hadn't heard in years floated across the porch. Clara looked up and felt a familiar warmth wash over her. "Lottie." She breathed a small smile, breaking through the tension on her face. The older woman descended the steps and pulled Clara into a firm hug, without asking. She still wore the same navy apron she always had, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun, her eyes sharp as ever. "You didn't call. Just show up on my porch like a ghost." "I wasn't sure I'd actually come until I did," Clara admitted. Lottie stepped back, giving her a once-over. "You look tired. I've had a month." "Mm-hmm." Lottie didn't press. She never had. "Come on in then. House hasn't changed. Except the clock in the parlor still thinks it's 1978. Clara followed her inside, her footsteps echoing against the old pine floors. Everything looked the same. The wallpaper, the framed photos along the stairwell, the crystal vase by the window still holding silk camellias. And yet, everything felt different. She stopped by the sideboard, tracing a finger along the edge. "Does he know I'm here?" Lottie paused in the doorway. "He's in the study. Knows you're on the grounds. Didn't ask questions." "Of course he didn't," Clara whispered. She made her way down the familiar hall, pausing just outside the double doors to the study. The wood was dark, the brass handle cool under her hand. She knocked once. "Come in!" came the voice, measured, unreadable. She opened the door slowly. Robert Jennings sat behind his desk, papers arranged in neat stacks, a fountain pen poised between his fingers. His hair was grayer now, his frame a little more bent, but his presence hadn't dulled. It filled the room like it always had, quiet, intimidating, and absolute. He looked up. Their eyes met. The moment stretched. "You're late," he said finally. "I wasn't planning to come at all," she replied, stepping inside. Robert leaned back slightly. "And yet here you are." Clara walked to the window, resting her hand on the sill. "I'm not here for reconciliation. I'm not here for approval." He nodded once. "That makes 2 of us." She turned to face him. "I came to ask for access to the family ledger, the foundation files, and the land documentation." He didn't blink. "Going public?" "Yes." Why Clara's voice didn't shake. "Because I need to remind a courtroom and a man who erased me that silence is not the same as surrender, and that worth isn't something you can measure in tax brackets or board seats." Robert studied her fingers, tapping once against the polished wood, I always wondered how long you'd live like someone else's idea of small. Clara raised her chin. I chose to step away. That was never your decision to make. No, he said, but you walked away from more than me. You walked away from legacy, from your mother's foundation, from the work we built. I walked away from control, she said quietly, from being used like a nameplate on a donation check. His face tightened. Just barely. You loved him, he said. I did. He didn't love you back. Clara blinked but didn't look away. Not the way I needed. A long silence followed. Finally, Robert opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a worn leather binder. He pushed it toward her. It's all in here. Property holdings, trust accounts, the center fund. You'll need Russell's sign-off, but I'll clear it with him. Clara stepped forward and took it in both hands. It was heavier than she remembered. You always underestimated how much like your mother you are, Robert said. She fought quieter battles, but she never lost one. Clara looked down at the binder. I don't want to fight. I just want to be seen. Robert nodded once. Then make them look. She left the study without another word. Lottie met her in the hallway, holding a small paper bag. Put some of that tea you liked in here, the jasmine one. Clara smiled, touched. Thank you. Lottie's expression softened. You gonna be all right, baby? I think I finally might, Clara said. She drove back into town as the sun slipped behind the trees, the binder on the passenger seat beside her like a silent companion. When she pulled into her apartment lot, she didn't feel the usual weight. Something had shifted. Inside the apartment was warm, with the soft orange glow of evening. She turned on the kettle, her movements slower now, more deliberate. And then her phone buzzed. Devin Blake. She answered, surprised by how natural it felt to hear his voice. Just checking in, he said. Tomorrow's the big day. Yes, Clara said. And I have everything I need. There was a pause on the line. Then I was thinking, after the hearing, maybe we could grab coffee if that's something you'd be open to. Clara felt a slow smile form. I think I'd like that. Another pause, softer now. Good. I'll see you tomorrow. She hung up and stood still for a long moment, watching the steam rise from the kettle. Tomorrow. It was no longer something she feared. It was something she was walking into, with her head held high. The morning of the final hearing arrived, dressed in fog. Charleston's streets were quiet, the usual hum of traffic softened by the thick mist rolling in from the harbor. Clara walked through it like a figure stepping out of a dream, or into one. Her linen suit was a gentle cream, pressed and modest, but it held structure. Confidence. Her heels clicked with certainty as she crossed the courthouse steps. She held the leather binder in one arm, her mother's locket resting above her collarbone. Inside the courtroom buzzed with a quiet tension. Darren was already there, seated beside Preston, looking every bit the man who believed he'd won before the game began. His suit was sharp, his expression cool. Aubrey was notably absent. Clara didn't need to wonder why. Melinda waved Clara over from their side of the bench, standing as she approached. You look like you walked straight out of a legacy bank, Ed, she whispered, a smirk playing at her lips. Clara smiled, her voice even. Let's give them something to remember. She sat down, placing the binder between them. Melinda peeked at it. Is that what I think it is? It's everything Clara said. Filed, certified, authenticated. Russell overnighted the final sign-off. Melinda exhaled, nodding once. Then we're ready. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Ellis entered moments later, her robe flowing behind her like a dark wave. She took her seat and glanced down at the documents in front of her. We're reconvening on case 332B Whitmore vs. Whitmore. Parties are present, yes, Your Honor. Preston and Melinda replied in unison. Judge Ellis nodded. Proceed. Preston stood first, his tone measured but tinged with confidence. Your Honor, given the defendant's withdrawal of support claims and her lack of financial documentation proving significant asset contributions, we move to finalize the property division as outlined in our original proposal. This includes the transfer of all jointly held property to Mr. Whitmore, who has maintained legal responsibility for the upkeep and mortgage of said assets since separation. Clara stared ahead, hands clasped lightly in her lap. Judge Ellis turned to Melinda. Ms. Cruz. Melinda rose calmly and walked to the center of the room. Your Honor, my client has not only located but now submits a full accounting of assets that were withheld from this court in the petitioner's financial disclosure. Preston looked up sharply. Withheld? Melinda didn't flinch. In your own Exhibit B, she said, holding up a copy of Darren's signed affidavit, you claimed all relevant marital property was accounted for. Yet as of last week, you began proceedings to liquidate assets from the Whitmore residence, including personal items, heirlooms, and art originally in my client's possession and excluded from your report. Preston opened his mouth, but Melinda raised her voice just slightly. Furthermore, we submit this binder. She walked it to the evidence table as proof of my client's independent financial status and stake in the Jennings Family Foundation, which holds over $80 million in assets and property across 4 states. A stunned silence fell over the room. Darren shifted in his seat. His jaw tightened. Judge Ellis leaned forward. Ms. Jennings, can you confirm this? Clara stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. I am Clara Jennings Whitmore, daughter of Robert Jennings, founder of the Jennings Family Foundation. I changed my legal name upon marriage for privacy. My assets remained separate during our union by trust design. I chose a modest lifestyle. I was not unaware I was intentional. She turned and faced Darren for the first time. He thought I had nothing, and treated me accordingly. Darren's lips parted, but no words came out. Clara looked back at the judge. I'm not seeking his money. I never was, but I won't let him rewrite our history to make me disappear. That house, those memories, they mattered. I mattered. Judge Ellis studied her for a long beat. Understood. Preston finally stood again, his tone clipped. Your Honor, we request time to review motion. Denied. Judge Ellis said, cutting him off. You submitted your final inventory last session. The court finds your filings incomplete and misleading. She turned to Clara and Melinda. Ms. Whitmore, do you wish to retain your share of the marital property? Clara hesitated. Just long enough. No, she said softly. I'm requesting that my share be sold and the proceeds donated to the Charleston Literacy Project. Under my mother's name. Gasps rose from the gallery. Even Melinda turned wide-eyed. Darren's face went pale. Judge Ellis raised her eyebrows. All of it. Clara nodded. Yes, it was never about the money. It was about who I was when no one saw me. That project helped me find myself again. I wanted to help others. The judge slowly nodded. Request granted. Let the record reflect full donation of awarded proceeds to charity. She looked at both parties. This court finds in favor of the respondent, Ms. Whitmore. Case closed. The gavel hit once, just once. And that was it. Clara exhaled a slow, measured breath that felt like the release of 1,000 unseen weights. As people filed out, she gathered her things with a quiet calm. She didn't look at Darren again. He stood frozen as if trying to rewind what had just happened, and still not understanding how he'd lost a game, he was certain he'd already won. Outside the courthouse, the fog had lifted. The sky had opened into soft, golden light. Melinda clapped Clara lightly on the shoulder. I have never ever seen anyone do what you just did. Clara smiled. Good. Maybe someone needed to. A few feet away, Devon waited beside the stairs, a coffee cup in each hand. Clara approached him slowly, the breeze tugging gently at her hair. You were right, she said. He tilted his head. About what some people are hard to miss, even when they try to be. He smiled, handing her a cup. Well, I see you now. She took the coffee, her fingers brushing his just slightly, and for the first time in years she didn't feel like she had to prove she belonged. Not to anyone, especially not to herself. The cafe was tucked into a quiet corner off King Street, shaded by a cluster of live oaks. Its windows glowed amber in the early evening light, and inside the air carried the warm scent of espresso and something sweet baking in the back. Clara sat at a table near the window, fingers wrapped around her coffee cup, the rim of it still warm. It felt surreal, like she had stepped out of one world and into another. Earlier that day, she had stood in a courtroom and reclaimed her name. Now she was sitting across from a man who hadn't asked her to explain herself once. Devon stirred a packet of sugar into his cup, then glanced at her over the rim. I think half the courtroom is still trying to figure out how you did that. Clara gave a soft laugh. It wasn't magic. Just truth. Finally told out loud. He smiled. Still, most people don't walk into court with a binder that rewrites the whole story. I didn't rewrite anything, she said. I just stopped letting someone else hold the pen. Devon studied her for a moment. Not intensely, just with quiet curiosity. You ever think about what comes next? Clara looked out the window. The street was soft with shadows, the world moving gently in the golden hour. Not until recently, she said. For a long time I thought the future was something I had to shrink myself to fit into. And now she met his eyes. Now I think I want to build something of my own. On my terms? Devon nodded slowly. Sounds like a good plan. They sipped in silence for a while. It wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt like a breath after a long swim. Clara realized with a quiet jolt that she wasn't performing anymore. Not checking her words for softness. Not managing someone else's comfort. She was just being. I heard what you told the judge, Devon said, after a moment. About donating the proceeds to the literacy project. Clara's expression softened. It's where I found myself again. During the days I felt like I didn't matter. Those shelves did. The kids who came in after school, the ones looking for stories about girls who fought dragons or ran away to find themselves, I saw pieces of me in them. He leaned forward a little. You didn't just leave Darren. You left that whole life behind. I had to, she said. I think part of me thought if I stayed I could fix it, make him see me again. But you can't fix a mirror that only reflects someone else's face. Devon sat back, thoughtful. You know what's strange? What I grew up in rooms like that. Rooms where everything looked perfect but felt hollow. My dad wanted me to follow him into law, into the firm, into control, but I never saw him happy. Just powerful. That's not the same thing. Clara watched him, her fingers tapping lightly against the cup. So why stay there? He smiled a little sheepishly. Because I didn't know what else I could be good at. I'm still figuring that part out. She tilted her head. You ever think about what you would build if no one else's name was attached to it? Devon didn't answer right away. But the question lingered between them like the last light of day. Outside, people passed in pairs and threes, the world moving on, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. And maybe to most of them, it hadn't. But to Clara, everything had changed. Later, they walked side by side toward the park, the sky turning dusky blue. A cool breeze tugged at the hem of her sleeve, and Devon offered her his arm without a word. She took it, surprising herself with how natural it felt. They strolled past the water, the rhythmic lapping of the tide steady and soothing. "Tell me something real," she said suddenly. Devon blinked. "What kind of real something you wouldn't say in a courtroom?" He laughed under his breath. "Okay. I can't stand olives, not even the fancy ones." Clara grinned. Bold confession. "Your turn." She thought for a beat, then said, "Sometimes I talk to books, out loud, like they're old friends." Devon looked amused. "And do they talk back? Only the good ones?" He glanced at her, more serious now. "Clara, can I ask you something?" "Of course. When you married him, did you ever feel like it was the right thing?" She looked up at the sky. The stars hadn't come out yet, but the moon was rising, a pale curve above the trees. "Yes," she said. "At first, he made me feel seen. But then, it turned into something else. Like I had to stay small so he could keep shining, and I kept shrinking because I thought that was love." Devon was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he said. "You don't have to be," she replied. "I'm not." He looked at her. "Why not?" "Because if I hadn't lost myself, I wouldn't have known how much I mattered." They reached the park bench near the fountain, where the water glimmered under the streetlight. She sat down, brushing her hair from her face, and Devon followed. "Can I tell you something else?" he said. Clara turned to him. "I think you're the most honest person I've ever met." She smiled, something in her chest softening. "That's a rare compliment." "It shouldn't be." They sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't the end of a conversation. It felt like a beginning. Clara looked out at the water, at the reflections dancing across the surface. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for someone to come save her. She wasn't surviving a life someone else chose. She was writing her own. And this quiet, golden moment beside someone who saw her without needing her to explain was chapter 1. The following morning, sunlight spilled through Clara's windows in soft amber ribbons. She lay still for a moment, watching how it danced across the hardwood floor. For the first time in a long while, her chest didn't carry the usual weight. No appointments, no damage control, no walking on emotional eggshells, just the strange, almost unfamiliar sensation of peace. Her phone buzzed quietly on the nightstand. It was a text from Melinda. "Check your email. PR is calling. Your story's out." Clara blinked, sitting up slowly. She reached for her laptop, opening it while the scent of fresh coffee from the timer-brewed pot filled the room. She clicked through to her inbox, heart picking up just a little. And there it was. An email forwarded from Melinda, subject line, "South Carolina heiress donates millions after quiet divorce settlement." Below it, links to local and national outlets. Headline spinning the story already. Clara Jennings Whitmore, hidden heiress, silent philanthropist, a woman with everything and nothing until she spoke up. She closed the laptop after a moment and leaned back against the pillows. She should have felt satisfied, vindicated. But instead a flicker of something else stirred. Unease, not regret, but exposure. Before she could sit with the feeling too long, her phone buzzed again. Devon saw the article. "Want to get some air?" She smiled without thinking. "Clara, meet you in an hour, Devon usual spot." She got dressed in something simple, white blouse jeans, a light cardigan. No designer labels, no inherited pieces, just herself. By the time she reached the cafe, Devon was already there, leaning against the brick wall with 2 iced coffees in hand. He looked up as she approached. "Morning, celebrity," he teased, holding out her drink. Clara rolled her eyes, taking it. "Please don't start." He grinned. "No, seriously. You're everywhere. That piece in The Observer, I mean, the woman who gave up millions, and still walked away richer." "You're already a headline. I didn't do it for headlines. I know. That's what makes it news." They started walking toward the market, weaving through tourists and vendors. The sun was warm, but not stifling, and the city buzzed with its usual charm, horses clopping down side streets, jazz spilling from open windows. "I didn't expect it to feel like this," Clara said after a while. Devon glanced over. "Like what? Loud? Public? A little surreal?" He nodded. "You've lived quietly for so long. Now everyone wants a piece of your story. They want the polished version, the one that makes good copy. But they don't see the nights I cried on the kitchen floor, or how many times I almost went back just because I didn't know who I was without him." Devon slowed his pace. "Then maybe now's the time to tell that story." Clara raised an eyebrow. "What, like an interview, maybe? Or maybe something more permanent? A foundation, a program, something in your voice, not theirs?" She took a sip of her coffee. "I've been thinking about starting something, for women, who've been erased, sidelined, told to be quiet." Devon's face lit up. "Now that is a headline I'd read." They stopped near the edge of the pier. Seagulls floated above the water and boats bobbed gently in their slips. "I know people who could help," he added. "Not lawyers, real community folks, educators, advocates. My friend Jolene runs a non-profit incubator in Atlanta. She'd love you." Clara turned to him, genuinely touched. "You don't have to do all this." "I know," he said softly, "but I want to." The air shifted, then quiet, fragile, meaningful. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not just someone who'd supported her in the courtroom, but someone who was slowly becoming part of the life she hadn't dared imagine for herself. "Can I ask you something?" she said, voice gentler now. "Of course. Why did you really come to my apartment that night before the hearing?" Devon looked out toward the water, then back at her. "I knew you were walking into that courtroom alone, and something about that didn't sit right. My dad would have let it happen. Darren wanted it that way. But you didn't deserve that." He hesitated, and maybe selfishly. "I wanted to meet the woman who made both of them nervous." Clara laughed quietly. "Well, mission accomplished." He stepped just a little closer, the space between them narrowing. "And maybe now, I just want to know you, without all the courtroom drama." Her smile softened her heart, fluttering in a way that was new. Not wild, not reckless. Safe. "Then ask," she said. He smiled. "What's your favorite book?" She laughed again. "That's your big question, first of many." She thought for a moment. "Jane Eyre." Devon nodded, pretending to jot a mental note. "Classic? Independent woman? Haunted mansion? Rebirth? Makes sense." "And you?" she asked. "The Secret Garden." He shrugged. Something about broken places blooming again. Clara's eyes met his, and she felt something settle. A quiet knowing. A door opening. "Let's see what we can grow," she said softly. He held out his hand. She took it. The quiet hum of Clara's espresso machine filled the kitchen, a comforting sound that had become part of her new morning rhythm. She moved slowly, purposefully, pouring steamed milk into her mug and watching it swirl with the coffee. Outside, Charleston's early light spilled across the courtyard, filtering through the trees in soft golden slants. It was the kind of morning she used to long for, slow, peaceful hers. She had barely taken her first sip when her phone buzzed. "Devon, any chance you're free this afternoon? Jolene's in town. Thought maybe you'd want to meet her." Clara's fingers hovered over the keyboard for a beat before replying. "Clara, absolutely." "What time, Devon? 3. I'll swing by." She stared at the message for a moment, heart flickering with something cautious but warm. After everything, the courtroom, the media, the emotional unraveling of her marriage, this thing with Devon still surprised her. Not because of its intensity, but because of its ease. There were no fireworks, no sweeping declarations, no performances. Just shared moments. Real ones. and now it seemed those moments were opening doors to something more. At 2:55 sharp, Devon's car pulled up in front of her building. He stepped out smiling, dressed in casual slacks and a navy button-down rolled at the sleeves. He looked both put together and relaxed in that effortless way that never tried too hard. "You ready for this?" he asked, as Clara joined him on the sidewalk. She nodded, tucking her hair behind her ear. Curious is more like it. Jolene's smart, intense, but good intense. She helps people who've been underestimated build entire organizations from scratch. Clara glanced over at him. "You think I'm building something I think you already started," he said. They drove towards the edge of town, where an old converted textile mill had been turned into an entrepreneurial co-op space. The brick exterior was softened by ivy crawling up its side and the gentle hum of jazz playing from a nearby cafe patio. Inside it buzzed with quiet activity, shared desks, whiteboards, young professionals pitching ideas, older ones, mentoring over coffee. Jolene was waiting in the back near a conference nook, tall and sharp-eyed with salt and pepper hair and a wide smile that radiated authority without ego. "You must be Clara," she said, offering her hand firmly. Clara shook it. "I've heard a lot about you." Jolene grinned. "Only half of it's true, I promise." They sat together at a round table, papers already spread out. Devon gave them space, drifting towards the back to chat with a team working on a literacy app. Jolene got straight to the point. "So I read your story. But what I want to know is, what do you want?" Clara paused. No one had asked her that so directly. "I want to help women," she said slowly. "Especially older women. Women who gave up careers or moved for their husbands or got told they were lucky to stay home and now feel like they've disappeared." "Good start," Jolene said, leaning back. "You want to help them how I want to create a space for them to rebuild?" Clara continued, warming to the idea. "Financial literacy, legal resources, confidence training. A place that says, you are not broken because your life changed. A place that reminds them they still matter." Jolene's expression didn't change, but something in her posture softened. "That she said is a vision, not a pitch." Clara smiled. "It's been living in the back of my mind for years. I just didn't think I was allowed to want something that big." Jolene pushed a legal pad toward her. "Write it down, all of it. The messier, the better. We'll help you shape it." They talked for nearly 2 hours, budget structures, board member ideas, potential partners. Clara's pen didn't stop moving. Every part of her lit up in ways she hadn't felt since grad school. This wasn't just purpose, it was hers. When the meeting finally wound down, Devon appeared beside her with a cup of tea. "You okay?" he asked gently. Clara turned to him, her eyes bright. "I feel awake." Later, as they drove back into the city, Clara looked out the window, watching the streets blur past. "I forgot how good it feels to build something from the ground up," she said. Devon kept his eyes on the road. "You're not just building it. You're building you." They parked in front of her building. Clara hesitated, hand on the door. "I don't want this to move too fast," she said softly. Devon looked at her serious now. "Neither do I." She met his eyes. "But I also don't want to be afraid of something good just because something else ended badly." Devon reached across the console, gently brushing her hand. "Then let's just be in this," he said. "No expectations, just honesty." Clara exhaled the tension in her shoulders, loosening. "That sounds like a start." That evening, alone in her apartment, she opened a new document on her laptop. At the top, she typed, "The Sella Project." Underneath, she wrote, "For the women who gave everything and still got left behind. For the ones who kept going even when no one clapped. For the ones still trying to remember their own names. This is for you." She stared at the screen for a long time, tears welling, gentle, not sad. She wasn't starting over, she was starting true. The courtyard behind Clara's apartment had become her evening ritual. A small metal table, 2 mismatched chairs, and string lights she'd finally strung up last week. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like her. Real. Quiet. Alive. She sipped a glass of iced mint tea and scrolled through the Sela project draft, now 30 pages deep. She'd been working non-stop, filling it with program ideas, outreach plans, even mock-ups of the center's design. The vision felt solid now, not just a dream scribbled on a legal pad. Still something in her chest buzzed nerves, maybe, or the weight of what came next. The screen lit up with a call. Devon. She smiled before answering. Hey, you busy? She glanced at the glowing document. Define busy. I have a question, he said, and a favor. Clara sat up. Go on. My mother's in town. She invited me to this community fundraiser dinner. I was going to say no, but now I'm thinking maybe it could be good. For both of us. Clara blinked. You want me to meet your mother? She's not a queen or anything. She's a retired librarian who obsesses over lemon pound cake and volunteers at the Historical Society. I just think maybe it's time. Clara hesitated, heart ticking a little faster. You don't have to say yes, he added quickly. Just think about it. She smiled gently. I'm thinking. Yes. There was a pause on the line, a soft inhale. Okay then, I'll pick you up at 6. Clara hung up, heart still humming. By the time Devon arrived, she was dressed in a navy wrap dress, simple jewelry hair softly curled at the ends. When he saw her, he gave a half smile that said everything. You look. He exhaled. That's it. You just look. They drove to the fundraiser in a restored colonial home on the Battery, where paper lanterns floated in the garden and a string quartet played under a magnolia tree. Clara recognized a few faces, local reporters, council members, even one of the foundation trustees her father had worked with years ago. Devon led her through the crowd with easy confidence. He introduced her as a community leader, which made her laugh under her breath. You're not wrong, she whispered. They reached a circle of guests near the dessert table, and there she was, Devon's mother, Evelyn. She was petite, silver-haired, with keen blue eyes and a posture that said she missed nothing. Her smile, though, was warm. So this is Clara Evelyn, said, extending her hand. Clara took it firm but gentle. It's a pleasure to meet you. I've heard about your project, Evelyn said, studying her. I think it's brave. Thank you. That means a lot. Evelyn gave a small, knowing smile. I imagine it's hard coming out of something difficult and stepping straight into something new. Clara nodded. It is, but it's harder to go back. Evelyn's expression softened. Then don't. You have my full support, whatever that's worth. They chatted for a while, drifting through polite conversation and gentle jokes. Clara watched how Devon looked at his mother with admiration. Yes, but also a kind of ease she hadn't seen in most men. There was no edge, no competition, just respect. Later, as they stood near the garden wall, Devon offered her a glass of sparkling water and leaned close. She likes you, he murmured. Clara grinned. Are you sure I think she was sizing me up for half the night? She does that to everyone. It means she respects you. Clara turned, resting her back lightly against the stone wall. Devon, can I ask you something? He nodded. What happens if this grows? If the Sela project gets real support, national press, maybe even funding from my family's foundation? What if I become visible? He studied her, the string lights casting a soft glow across her features. Then I'll be proud, he said simply. And I'll keep showing up, for you. Clara looked at him, her voice quiet. I wasn't built for spotlight, Devon's voice matched hers in tone. Maybe not. But you were built for impact. Something in her chest pulled tight like a string drawn toward music. Back at her apartment later that night, Clara kicked off her shoes and leaned against the door, exhaling deeply. It wasn't exhaustion. It was fullness. The kind of emotional stretch that only comes when you're growing in real time. She padded barefoot into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and opened her laptop again. The Sella project was still there waiting. This time she clicked New Document and started drafting a letter. Dear members of the Jennings Family Foundation Board, my name is Clara Jennings Whitmore. You may not know me well, but you've likely heard my name these past few weeks. I'm writing not as an heir, but as a woman who knows what it means to fall through the cracks of a polished life. I'm building something I believe in, and I'm asking for your partnership not because of my last name, but because of my vision. Her fingers didn't stop. The letter poured out, clear, passionate, real. When it was done, she sat back. Not afraid, not unsure. Ready. Clara stood just outside the glass doors of the Jennings Family Foundation, her heart knocking against her ribs with slow, deliberate force. It had been 12 years since she'd last stepped foot inside this building. 12 years since she'd walked out invisible behind her married name, tucked into someone else's life. Now she was back by choice. Inside the lobby was quiet, elegant, in that understated Southern way, clean lines, mahogany paneling, soft lighting, and the faint scent of gardenia from a vase near reception. She approached the desk. The receptionist, a woman in her early 50s with pearl earrings and kind eyes, looked up and offered a practiced smile. Good afternoon. Can I help you? Clara paused, then lifted her chin slightly. Yes. My name is Clara Jennings Whitmore. I have a meeting with the board. The woman's eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly, and then she nodded, typing quickly. Of course, Ms. Whitmore. They're expecting you. Conference room 3. Clara walked slowly down the hallway, her heels muffled against the thick carpet. The letter she'd sent had worked at least enough to get their attention. Now came the hard part, asking to be seen as more than the woman they once wrote out of the story. She stepped into the room and found 4 board members seated around a long table. Among them were her father's old partner, Robert Ellis, and 2 newer trustees she barely recognized. And at the far end of the table sat Sylvia Jennings, her aunt. Sylvia stood. Clara. Clara met her gaze. Aunt Sylvia. Sylvia was always polished, her gray hair swept back into a perfect bun, her demeanor poised and watchful. She gestured toward the empty seat at the head of the table. Have a seat. Clara did, folding her hands carefully in her lap. We read your letter, Robert said, adjusting his glasses. It was passionate. I meant every word Clara said. Sylvia folded her arms gently. You've been absent for a long time, Clara. You walked away from the foundation, from your role in the family, and from its responsibilities. And now you return with a proposal for a project that, while admirable, would require significant resources. Why now? Clara took a steady breath. Because I've lived the consequences of silence, of staying in the background. I know what it's like to disappear in plain sight. She paused, her voice steady. The Sella project isn't charity. It's restoration. It's structure. It's a way for women, especially older women, to find footing again after their lives have been rewritten. And I'm not asking for a handout. I'm offering to lead it. Fully. With accountability. With vision. One of the newer trustees, a woman named Camille, leaned forward. We've been trying to find new ways to expand the Foundation's community outreach. Your proposal fills a gap. Sylvia looked at her sharply. But we also have to consider optics. The press has framed this story in ways that aren't always flattering to the Foundation. Clara leaned in, voice calm, but firm. That's exactly why we have to act now. People are paying attention. They want to see what we do, not just what we claim to stand for. Silence. Then Robert nodded slowly. We'll review your materials. But I have to say it's the first time in years anyone's come in here and spoken with your father's kind of clarity. Clara's throat tightened slightly. I learned from him. Quietly, but thoroughly. They dismissed the meeting with vague promises and polite thank yous. As Clara stood to leave, Sylvia rose as well and walked with her to the hallway. You've changed, Sylvia said not unkindly. Clara met her eyes. So has the world. Sylvia sighed, studying her. I hope this project isn't about settling a score. Clara's expression didn't shift. It's about opening a door I wish someone had opened for me. Sylvia nodded once. Then she reached into her bag and handed Clara a folded piece of paper. This was your father's last annual address before he stepped down. He said you inspired it. I thought you should have a copy. Clara took it gently, her fingers brushing the faded edges. Thank you. She left the building with 1,000 thoughts swirling, but none more powerful than this: she was finally being heard. Maybe not yet trusted, maybe not fully accepted, but heard. And that was more than she'd dared hope for just weeks ago. Later that evening, Devon showed up at her apartment unannounced, holding 2 takeout bags and a bottle of wine. I figured this might be a big day, he said, stepping inside. Clara smiled, touched. You figured right. They sat at her tiny kitchen table eating noodles from paper boxes and laughing about how neither of them could ever figure out the chopsticks. So he said eventually, how did it go? Clara leaned back in her chair, sipping wine. They didn't say yes, but they didn't say no. That's something. She looked at him, thoughtful. It's strange. I always thought reclaiming my name, my legacy, would feel like standing on top of a mountain. But it's quieter than that. Devon smiled softly. Some of the best victories are. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. And you're not done yet. She looked down at their hands. Not even close. Clara stood in front of the long mirror in her bedroom, tugging gently at the sleeve of her soft gray dress. The fabric draped elegantly, simple and strong, just like she wanted to feel. Her reflection didn't show nerves, but she felt them just under her skin, like tiny tremors in the earth, before something shifts. Tonight wasn't just a fundraiser. It was the first public unveiling of the Cella project. The board hadn't given a full green light yet, but they'd agreed to host a pilot program under the foundation's umbrella, with Clara leading the launch. It was more than she'd expected, and still not quite a victory. Not yet. Her phone lit up with a message from Devon. Car's out front. I'll wait. She grabbed her clutch, took one last glance in the mirror, and whispered to herself, You earned this. All of it. Downstairs, Devon stepped out of the town car and opened the door for her. His eyes moved over her with quiet admiration. You look calm, he said, a little surprised. Clara smiled as she settled into the seat. I think that's the first time anyone said that to me before something this big. Maybe it's because you know who you are now. She turned to him, studying the curve of his jaw, the gentleness in his gaze. Maybe it's because I'm not doing it alone. They arrived at the Charleston Women's Heritage Hall just as twilight wrapped the city in amber. The building with its tall white columns and soft uplighting buzzed with guests. Donors, non-profit leaders, media. Clara took a slow breath as the valet opened her door. She stepped out, heels clicking against the stone eyes forward. Inside the reception was warm humming with low conversation and the clinking of glasses. Clara spotted Jolene by the check-in table, dressed in deep green, already talking with 2 local councilwomen. Nearby, Aunt Sylvia stood with Robert and a few board members. Clara caught her eye, and to her surprise, Sylvia nodded with something close to pride. Devon touched her elbow gently. "You ready now?" she whispered. "But I'm going anyway." An hour into the event, after mingling with guests and answering the same 5 questions about the program, Clara found herself momentarily alone near the side garden. She stepped outside for a breath of fresh air, letting the quiet wrap around her like a shawl. She thought of her old life, of long dinner parties, where she'd stood silently beside Darren, smiling on cue, laughed at the right times, thanked people for compliments she hadn't earned. This was different. This was hers. "Beautiful night," a voice said behind her. Clara turned to find Sylvia standing there, a glass of sparkling water in her hand. "It is," Clara replied, surprised she'd followed her out. Sylvia stepped beside her. "You handled yourself well tonight. Better than I did at my first big event. I spilled wine on a state senator." Clara raised an eyebrow, amused. "Really twice." They shared a quiet laugh. Sylvia's voice lowered. "I know I've been cautious, guarded. Your father and I built this foundation from the ground up, and I've always been protective of it." "I understand," Clara said. "I used to think you were shutting me out, but I realize now you were holding it together in ways I couldn't see." Sylvia turned to her. "You're not who you were, Clara. That woman wouldn't have survived what you went through. This one will thrive." The words settled over her like a blessing. Not dramatic, just real. "I want this to work," Clara said quietly. "Not for headlines or legacy, but because there are women waiting for someone to say they still matter. I know what that weight feels like." Sylvia nodded. "And you'll be the one to reach them." They returned inside just as the evening's program was about to begin. Devon gave Clara a reassuring look from across the room. The MC introduced her, and for a brief second the spotlight made her blink. But then she stepped forward, her voice steady as it filled the hall. "When I walked away from my old life, people said I was reckless, that I'd regret it. What they didn't see was that I wasn't walking away, I was walking toward myself." She paused, letting the weight of the words land. The Sella Project is for women who've been told their best years are behind them, who've been silenced, sidelined, or forgotten. It's a second beginning, a place to be seen again. A soft murmur of approval moved through the crowd. She continued. "This project isn't about rescuing women. It's about giving them the tools to rescue themselves." Clara closed with a story, her story. Brief, honest, vulnerable. She didn't name Darren. She didn't dwell in pain. She focused on what came after. The room rose to its feet. Later that night, in the quiet of her living room, Devon sat beside her on the couch. The air between them was soft, unhurried. "You were brilliant," he said, brushing a hand lightly across hers. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, the adrenaline finally wearing off. "I feel real," she whispered. "You are?" And in the silence that followed, she believed it. Not because the world applauded, but because for the first time, she wasn't waiting for it to. The morning after the fundraiser, Clara sat at her kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a warm mug of cinnamon coffee, staring at the open laptop in front of her. The Sella Project's inbox was full. Dozens of messages. Some were from women she'd never met, some older, some younger, but all with stories that echoed pieces of her own. Others were from local organizations offering resources, partnerships, volunteers. And one from Darren. The name froze her breath. She hadn't heard from him since the divorce proceedings. Not directly. Any communication had been through lawyers, brief and cold. Seeing his name in her inbox now felt like a ghost pulling up a chair at her table. She hesitated, then clicked it open. Clara, I saw the article in the Chronicle. Congratulations on the launch. There's something I'd like to discuss, something that involves the foundation and your family's estate. It would be best if we spoke in person. Let me know when you're available. Darren. No hope you're well. No apology, no recognition of the mess he left in his wake. Just a request, as if they were old colleagues, not ex-spouses. Clara exhaled slowly, then shut the laptop. Later that afternoon, she told Devon over lunch at a small cafe near the harbor. He listened carefully, brows slightly knit, setting his fork down as she spoke. He wants to meet, she said. He says it's foundation-related. Devon leaned back, arms crossed. That feels convenient. I know. Part of me thinks I should ignore it. What does the other part say? Clara stirred her tea. That I need to look him in the eye one last time. Not for closure, not even for answers, but to prove to myself that he doesn't own a single piece of me anymore. Devon was quiet for a beat. Then he nodded. Then I'll be outside the restaurant. She looked up, surprised. You don't have to do that. I'm not coming in. I just want to be near. In case. Clara smiled, something soft pulling in her chest. Thank you. The meeting was set for the following Thursday at a small bistro downtown. Clara arrived 10 minutes early. She wore a fitted cream blazer over dark jeans, her hair pulled back in a low knot. She wanted to look like herself, professional, calm, and unmistakably whole. Darren arrived right on time. He looked older, not in a bad way, just more tired around the eyes, a little stiffer in his movements. His tailored shirt and watch still screamed money, but his energy was different. Tense, guarded. Clara, he said, sliding into the seat across from her. Darren. They sat in silence for a few moments, menus unopened. Finally, he spoke. I read your proposal. Impressive work. Truly. She met his eyes, unflinching. You didn't ask to meet just to compliment me. He nodded, folding his hands. No. There's been some shifting in the boardroom. A few of the trustees are considering reallocating legacy funds to support your program. That's great news, she said carefully. It is, he agreed. Except it complicates things. My family has long-standing grants tied into those funds. If your project gains more traction, they may have to cut other initiatives. Clara blinked. Let me guess. Initiatives you manage. His jaw tightened slightly. That's not the point. The foundation can't survive if it splinters. She tilted her head. No, Darren. What it can't survive is becoming irrelevant. He said nothing, his fingers tapping once on the table. She continued quieter now. You didn't ask me here to warn me. You asked me here to intimidate me, to remind me how things used to work. His eyes narrowed, but she didn't flinch. I know how this goes, she said. The little comments, the veiled threats, the behind-the-scenes politics. I played that game for years. But I'm not playing anymore. Darren's voice lowered. I underestimated you. She gave a small smile. That's not new. The check came. Darren reached for it, but Clara stopped him. No, thank you. I'm paying for myself now. She left the restaurant with her head high and heart pounding. Outside, Devon stood by the corner, phone in hand. When he saw her, he slipped it into his pocket and stepped forward. How'd it go? He asked. Clara didn't say anything for a moment. Then she smiled, not out of pride, but relief. I finally said everything I needed to. Devon offered her his arm, and she took it without hesitation. Back at her apartment later that evening, Clara lit a candle and sat on the floor with a notepad. She wasn't writing a strategy or a letter this time. Just thoughts, feelings, things that had lingered too long without names. She wrote until her hand ached, until the words slowed, and the ache in her chest finally softened. She folded the paper and tucked it into a small box she kept by her bed, the one labeled Truth. Then she climbed into bed, pulled the covers up, and let herself rest. Not because she was running, but because she'd finally stopped. Rain tapped softly against the wide windows of Clara's office, the sky outside a silver wash over Charleston. Inside, the soft glow of a desk lamp pooled over a stack of folders, Post-its, and a single orchid Devon had brought her after her last board meeting, a quiet gesture that still made her smile when she looked at it. The Selah project had moved from proposal to reality faster than Clara had ever imagined. With board approval now formalized, she'd been handed a small office in a shared non-profit co-working hub downtown. Modest, yes, but it was hers. And outside her office door, 2 interns worked quietly at their laptops, while a retired social worker ran a budget class in the conference room. The space was alive, but today something hung in the air. It started with a call from Camille, one of the younger board members who'd championed her project from the start. "There's talk," Camille had said, softly. "Not from the board directly, but around the foundation circles. Darren's been having meetings, quiet ones." Clara had felt it coming. She knew that man's strategy like the back of her hand: delay, distract, discredit. "He's floating a narrative," Camille continued. "That this is personal for you. That Selah is less about the women it's helping and more about your image." Clara's hand tightened on her pen. "And the worst part," Camille added, "is that he's using your last name to get people to listen. Some think you're just trying to reclaim your spot in the family legacy." Clara had closed her eyes then, the ache settling in her chest like fog. Now she stood at the window, watching the soft spill of rain on the street, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Doubt sharp and whispering crept in. What if they believed him? What if all this work? Every late night, every story she'd gathered, every woman who'd walked through their doors got buried under whispers. A knock pulled her from her spiral. Devon stepped in his jacket. Damp curls tousled from the weather. He didn't say anything right away, just looked at her, reading her too easily. "You heard?" she asked. He nodded slowly, crossing the room. "Camille called me too." Clara leaned back against her desk, arms folded. "It's exhausting. Every time I think I've stepped out of his shadow, he just stretches it farther." Devon was quiet for a long moment. "You know," he said finally, "when I first started my business, a competitor tried something similar. Said I was too young, too untested, that I'd only gotten my foot in the door because of my dad's connections." Clara looked up, surprised. "What did you do?" "I didn't defend myself," he said. "I just kept doing the work, and I made sure that the people who mattered saw it." She nodded slowly, letting his words sink in. "But Clara," he added, stepping closer, "you're not just doing good work. You're changing lives. If people want to talk, let them. You don't owe anyone an explanation for surviving and coming back stronger." Her eyes welled with quiet emotion. "Sometimes I wish I could just build without the noise." "You are," he said gently. "You're just not used to the sound of your own power yet." Later that evening, she returned to the Selah space, now quiet and warm, with the soft lamplight left on by the team before they'd left for the day. Clara walked down the hallway and paused at the community board. Taped up in the corner was a letter. It was handwritten with uneven lines and a shaky signature at the bottom. "Ms. Clara, I sat in the back of your budget class last week. I didn't speak. I wasn't ready. But I saw women who looked like me. Women who thought it was too late to begin again. I just wanted to say thank you. I'm coming back next week. Angela, room 3B, housing floor." 2. Clara pressed her hand to her chest, tears welling without warning. That was the answer. That letter mattered more than gossip, than image, than old wounds wrapped in polished words. The next morning she called Camille. "Let them talk," Clara said. "I'll be over here doing the work. And if the board ever wants to hear from the women we're serving, I'll make sure their voices are loud and clear." Camille's voice was steady. "I'll be behind you." That afternoon, Clara hosted a round table with 6 women currently in Sella's mentorship program. Over tea and sandwiches, they spoke honestly about fear, about shame, about starting over. And they spoke of Clara, of how seeing someone who'd once been invisible stand up and stay standing gave them permission to do the same. Later that night, Devon found her in the courtyard behind her apartment, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the stars. He sat beside her, without a word. "I think Clara said softly that no matter what happens now, I'll be okay." He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "You're already more than okay." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder, listening to the quiet around them. No headlines, no noise, just peace. Earned, not gifted, and full of promise. The courthouse steps were warm under Clara's heels as she stood at the top, waiting for the others to gather. The sun had broken through a long week of spring rain, casting soft light over the marble columns and iron railings. It felt symbolic somehow, like the closing of something long and gray. Inside, the court hearing had been quiet, almost clinical. A final ruling on the estate dispute Darren had quietly escalated behind the scenes. He'd claimed that her involvement in the foundation complicated old agreements tied to the Jennings family trust, tried to cast her as reckless, unqualified, self-interested. But the judge had ruled decisively. The foundation could continue to support the Sela project with no restrictions. Her name and leadership stood firm. Legally, publicly, officially. Now Clara waited outside, not for reporters, though they lingered across the square, but for the women. Her women. One by one they arrived. Angela, who used to keep her eyes on the floor, now stood taller in a pale blue suit she'd bought with her first paycheck after re-entering the workforce. Yvette, a retired nurse and grandmother, walked arm in arm with Melissa, a quiet but sharp 25-year-old, who'd been through more in 5 years than most saw in 50. They came to stand beside Clara, not as decoration or support, but as witnesses. As proof. "I told them I didn't want a press conference," Clara said quietly. "But if they take pictures, I want you in them." Angela blinked. "Me, all of you." She looked out over the square where cameras clicked lenses aimed. They can photograph a woman standing alone, or they can photograph what real change looks like. Melissa smirked. "We clean up pretty well." That got a soft laugh. Then Clara's phone buzzed. Devon. "Where are you?" he'd written. "Top of the steps. Bring coffee. I need a reason to keep smiling." A minute later, he was walking toward her, holding 2 to-go cups, and giving her that familiar look that had slowly, patiently unraveled every guarded part of her. "You did it," he said, simply handing her the drink. "No," Clara said, glancing at the women beside her. "We did." He looked at them. "That's true, but you led them here?" They stood there in the sun as a reporter from the Charleston Observer approached politely, asking for a quote. Clara hesitated. Then she stepped forward. The court ruling wasn't about money. It was about voice, she said. About whether a woman who'd once been written off could come back, not with vengeance, but with vision. She turned slightly, motioning to the women beside her. "This isn't my ending. It's our beginning." The reporter lowered her mic, slowly, eyes soft. Later, Clara and Devon walked along the waterfront, shoes in hand toes in the cool sand. "I was thinking," Clara said, glancing sideways at him, "about how it all started." Devon smiled. "You mean when I insulted your resume and you walked out of my office?" Clara laughed, shaking her head. "No, before that. When I left the marriage, when I had nothing but a suitcase and a storage unit. I remember thinking, What if this is the biggest mistake of my life? And now, he asked gently. She stopped turning to face him. The wind lifted strands of her hair across her cheek. Now, I think. Maybe it was the first right choice I made. They stood there for a while in silence, letting the salt air wrap around them. Eventually, they sat on a bench overlooking the water, sharing a bag of kettle corn, and letting the breeze speak for a while. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. Do you think I'll always carry that old life with me? I think Devon said you'll carry the parts that shaped you, but not the ones that tried to break you. She nodded slowly. I can live with that. He looked at her, his voice quiet. What happens next? Clara thought for a long moment. Selah opens its second location next month. Angela's going to manage it. Melissa just got a full scholarship for social work. The program's growing faster than I can keep up with. Devon smiled. That's not what I meant. She tilted her head. Then what did you mean I meant you, Clara? What happens next for you? She looked out at the water, the horizon glowing soft gold. For the first time in a long time, the answer didn't feel tangled or uncertain. I build, she said. I love. I rest when I need to. I keep becoming someone I'm proud of. Devon nodded content. And as the tide rolled in gentle and constant, Clara Jennings Whitmore sat back heart full, not of what she'd lost, but of everything she had finally found. Freedom, purpose, and herself.